Many thanks to violinist Sander Tingstad and his ensemble for really invigorating music this morning. Prime Minister, Laureate, Excellencies, ladies and friends, ladies and gentlemen, friends of the Arctic. It is a true pleasure for me as the rector of UiT, the Arctic University of Norway, to share this occasion with you on behalf of the steering committee of the Mohn Prize. We are gathered here to honor the laureate of the International Mohn Prize for Outstanding Research related to the Arctic for 2024, Professor Oren Young. Professor Young is widely recognized as the world's foremost expert on international governance and environmental institutions in the Arctic. And for almost 40 years, his research and leadership have been central in building a new vision of integrative and collaborative studies of the Arctic. Excellent research, with great relevance for the future development in the Arctic, is exactly what the Mohn Prize aims to honor. And we are doing this in a close and fruitful collaboration, I'd say, with Arctic Frontiers here today. We are proud to work together to highlight and strengthen the region's role in the Arctic research. With these introductory remarks, it is a great pleasure for me to welcome to the stage the Prime Minister of Norway, Jonas Gahr Støre. Prime Minister.
Dear friends, good morning. It is a true honor for me on behalf of the Norwegian government and a great personal pleasure to congratulate Dr. and Professor Emeritus Oren Young on the Mohn Prize 2024. Heartfelt congratulations, Professor. So the Mohn Prize recognizes outstanding research in the Arctic. And this year, the prize goes to an outstanding person. So the prize first, Henrik Mohn, let us recall, born in 1835, lived until 1916, was a Norwegian astronomer, meteorologist, even a theologian. It all comes well together. And perhaps he was the world's first climate scientist, decades before even the concept was conceived, and we saw the climate threat emerging. So let us put it this way. Henrik Mohn has laid the foundation for Norway's Arctic research and also Arctic research far beyond Norway. And you, Dr. Young, has brought and expanded in the global field many steps forward of this immensely important knowledge base through your academic career, together with your colleagues and students from all around the world. Many of them are gathered here today. You have for years pioneered the field of international environmental governance, resource management, and geopolitics in the Arctic. Putting these different elements together, treated separately, they make us weaker. Put together, they can create action. And this is a field very close to the heart of, I think, the backbone now of Norwegian politics, of my government's program, and that is why we write into our platforms that the High North is the priority of our foreign and security policy. You have contributed more than 20 books, 150 scientific articles through more than 50 years of your career. Did you start when you were 15? Some people start early. Mozart was even earlier, but must have been early. More than 30 years ago, you wrote about Arctic politics, conflict, and cooperation in the circumpolar north. And I think few people imagined at that time what we were about to see during the coming decades. I quote from your work, "The Arctic has emerged as an area of increasing political, strategic, and economic importance." And remember, back at that time, the Arctic was something very remote. And in the big capitals of Europe and America and around the world, the Arctic was something kind of a terra nullus up there, which we knew little about and had little meaning. You proved them wrong. You have spent much of your career focusing on the human dimension of climate change impacts. And we should be reminded that it is really all about people and not be lost in kind of academic concepts. It all boils down to living conditions of current and future generations. And it was, we should remember, and I see many of those scientists in this room, it was knowledge from the Arctic that really gave us the fundamental indications about what climate change was really about. The Arctic Impact Assessment from 2004 and what was coming on there for the IPCC, very important work. In addition to this, you have contributed to establishing important networks, focusing on peaceful international cooperation. And I would say that in that way you facilitated the development of Arctic as a kind of exotic concept into an idea of how people and governments could come together and make sense and take responsibility, and creating a circumpolar gathering, and let us call it by the right name, laying the foundation for the Arctic Council, which is today our most important forum for managing the Arctic. So now, upon announcing the Mohn Prize, Dr. Young, you said, and you are right, that it is a critical time for the Arctic. And we know if there's a critical time for the Arctic, it is a critical time for the globe, for the Antarctic, for everything in between. A time which requires a creative interplay between science and politics, between scientists and governments, and you're absolutely right. I have experienced firsthand how that close interplay between scientists and government, as well as indigenous permanent participants in the Arctic Council, how that can work. And that was why, actually, I remained the president of the Sami Parliament yesterday, and I said when I was foreign minister, I gave half of my speaking time on behalf of Norway to her so that she could speak and lift those voices that needed to be heard. So this type of closeness is something I have not experienced in any other international organization. And let's remember that the regional organization we created up here in the north after the end of the Cold War, it is now the Arctic Council that is left, because the others have been brought to some kind of silence after the terrible war that has erupted further south in Europe. And that's why we feel, as a government and as the president of the Arctic Council, a deep responsibility of preserving, protecting, and taking forward this fine council. So the Mohn Prize is an acknowledgement of the importance of international cooperation in large and sustainable development in the Arctic in all its pieces, more than ever. International research, collaboration that brings academia, policy, industries and business together. And as I said yesterday, we don't have all those players around the table right now, because there's one country that has put itself on the side. But we should not close those doors and throw the keys away. One day they may be opened again, and we need all around that Arctic table. So the Arctic Council, which we are now chairing, is under challenging conditions, but it is and remains the most important forum for cooperation on these matters, much thanks to the work of pioneers like you, Mr. Young. So I hope that this prize will serve as an inspiration to all those who know how much the Arctic matters. I salute the Arctic Frontier for giving us the framework, the dynamics of this interplay, because this contribution, this cooperation contributes to maintaining the high north as an area of stability and predictability. And that's why I, even under the current political conditions, are saying that our vision should still be high north, low tension. So thank you and congratulations, and may I ask you to come to the scene, Mr. Young.
Thank you.
You may applaud.
I'm deeply grateful for this award, and I'm truly honored to have it presented by the Prime Minister. Thank you so much. The award constitutes a capstone on a career stretching back over more than 50 years. I come from the world of analysts, those motivated primarily by a desire to understand how the world works. In my case, the development and operation of governance systems, especially large governance systems at the international level. Why and how do such governance systems form? Why are some governance systems more successful than others? How resilient are such systems in the face of serious stresses, such as the ones that the Prime Minister mentioned just a moment ago? But I have a long-standing interest in promoting constructive engagement between analysts and practitioners, those responsible for making choices and implementing them in various policy settings. Misunderstandings and miscommunication between analysts and practitioners are common. They have different agendas. They apply different criteria in evaluating their performance. But constructive engagement is possible. As the Prime Minister mentioned, the importance of the collaboration between science and policy. Success stories in the realm of effective, successful collaboration often involve common efforts to develop narratives or interpretive frameworks to guide the work of policymakers seeking to make sense out of complex situations. In the Arctic, we worked together during the 1980s and the 1990s to craft a narrative to guide the promotion of international cooperation in the aftermath of the Cold War. Whether we call the Arctic a zone of peace, the age of the Arctic, or high north, low tension, this narrative had several key premises. The Arctic, we thought, was a distinctive region with a policy agenda of its own, centered on issues of environmental protection and sustainable development. There were no intractable conflicts rooted in the Arctic itself. The region was of interest primarily to the Arctic states. The Arctic presented opportunities in a post-Cold War environment to promote East-West cooperation. Progress was possible independent of developments in the outside world. This framework, this narrative, provided a basis, among other things, for the articulation of the Arctic Environmental Protection Strategy in 1991, and then the Arctic Council in 1996. Today, this narrative is no longer helpful. We are in need of a new Arctic narrative to guide cooperation under the conditions that prevail today. One that avoids the simplistic tropes of neo-realist arguments about great power politics and legalistic calls for legally binding agreements. Similar observations are in order about Arctic development, the specific theme of this morning's session. Traditional thinking about Arctic development has reflected the influence of two quite divergent narratives that grew up over a number of decades. One of these narratives emphasizes what we call metropole, hinterland, or core periphery relationships, and it argues that the metropolitan interests and preferences drive the development of hinterlands. At the end of the day, it's the interests of the powerful forces in the capitals. But the other narrative focuses on remote, largely self-contained communities, featuring subsistence lifestyles. This narrative argues that these communities have a capacity to adapt nimbly and agilely to changes in biophysical conditions. Today, neither of these narratives about Arctic development is helpful. As in the case of governance systems, we are in need of a new narrative, one that recognizes linkages among the international level, the local level, the regional level, and the national level, and is alert to the need to provide opportunities, real opportunities for actors at all these levels to participate effectively in making and implementing collective choices. And I was struck in this regard by the Prime Minister's comment about when he was Foreign Minister, providing equal time for the voices of the local communities, the local players, to have a meaningful voice in the making of these decisions, to engage together to address these kinds of concerns. My experience over the years tells me that success in promoting constructive engagement between analysts and practitioners in efforts of this sort depends on mutual respect and trust that arise when people come to know each other as individuals rather than as occupants of formal roles. And I think I'm echoing again what the Prime Minister said. It comes down to people. You know, when people form, when the chemistry is right, when people respect each other and trust each other, then we can make progress toward, that doesn't mean we don't have conflicts, but we can nevertheless make progress in dealing with common interests of mutual concern where there is room, even while we recognize conflicts ongoing, to make progress in dealing with significant issues. We cannot assume that such relationships will arise naturally. They don't just happen. We should be on the lookout for opportunities to nurture them. As a matter of priority, as we seek to make progress in dealing with Arctic issues in the coming years, we must be aware of the importance of these relationships, and we must make conscious efforts to find opportunities to bring these communities together in productive dialogue to come up with innovative ways that are appropriate to the times, so they're not just applying the same old narratives under changed circumstances, but which are innovative and come up with new perspectives which will help us to make progress in dealing with issues of common concern. So that's my message, and I hope to be able to continue for some time more to continue to work on these issues. So thank you so much. It's a tremendous honor to be able to speak to you this morning. And again, thank you, Prime Minister, for those kind words that you gave before I spoke.
To me, coexistence consists of awareness of the past, education for the future, and diverse collaboration when decisions are being made, as all actions in the Arctic affect all residents and stakeholders in the North.
Coexistence in the Arctic is to me all about finding the right balance and compromises between industry, people, and the environment. I believe that the developments made and the natural resources harvested in the Arctic has to create benefits and opportunities for the Arctic region.
A window light? Yes, I think so. Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Arctic Frontiers 2024. Time flies.
You're in a time warp.
I'm in a time warp, you know. I've seen some new faces, so it seems flights are arriving. Welcome to Tromsø, and I hope you followed us online in the last 1.5 days. Do you know that I was told I have a good chance for the Mohn Prize in the years ahead if I develop a new Arctic narrative, well-grounded in theory, and sellable to a policymaker? So there is much work. So if anybody has a smart idea, you know where to find me. And again, thanks to the musicians, Arctic Philharmonics and Sander Tingstad and his ensemble. Great music. What are we doing today?
Well, we're really focusing in this session, of course, on rethinking Arctic development. And I was certainly very struck, as I'm sure you all were, by Professor Young's words about the fact that we need this new narrative for global, for national, and for local communities, which is really based on respect and trust. And that is what we're going to be delving into, in fact, in this session. Of course, the region really is shifting when it comes to development from this singular profit focus to this real need for coexistence amid really diverse interests.
And I think Arctic Frontiers is the best place, no? We were told it's all about constructive engagement. It's about framework dynamics that Arctic Frontiers provides. So I think we can find a better place in the Arctic to rediscuss Arctic development.
But there are, of course, some really key questions that we're going to be delving into. Not least, what level of benefits do local communities really need to justify the development of Arctic natural resources? So that's what we're going to be focusing on. Andreas, thank you. I'm going to leave you there, and we'll walk over so that I can introduce somebody who is really going to set the scene for this debate and to tell a story about ambition, cooperation, and compromise, all of those that are really at stake in this great debate. So please do welcome Liz Carvalho, who is the Vice President of the NANA Regional Corporation in the United States. Welcome.
Good morning, Prime Minister, President of the Sami Council, ladies and gentlemen, and other esteemed guests and respected partners. Koyana, thank you for having me as a guest here in your homelands. Koyana also to Arctic Frontiers and the Ted Stevens Security Center for bringing me here all the way from Kotzebue, Alaska. Uvanga ataga kolok, kikik dagok minurunga, akaga iriktak, anaga aporak, Nalakmi Jessica, Liz Carvalho. Everyone in this room today is here because we have a role in shaping the future of the Arctic. Seen to most people in the world as an unforgiving and desolate landscape, some of us here simply know it as home. We know its intense beauty and harsh challenges. Our characters and communities are shaped by this landscape where we experience the beautiful reemergence of sunlight in the spring and the challenges of extreme weather on keeping our homes warm and planes landing. We are also shaped by the traditional knowledge we hold and the values that serve us at the center of our survival in the Arctic. Inupiaq are keenly aware that we are one of the Arctic's first resource developers and its first conservationists. We can be both at once. We don't view that as a contradiction. Our ability to hold space for both approaches is part of our Indigenous identity. For millennia, our values, cooperation, responsibility to tribe, and respect for others helped us navigate and thrive despite at times the tough realities of our world. It is appropriate in many ways that the title of this conference is Action, Reaction, because for the Inupiat of Northwest Alaska, when I say that our values center our survival, I mean that literally. Our values were shaped by our ancestors as a compass to react to the challenging environment in which we live. After all, when you live in a community with just a few hundred people and it's 50 below 0 Fahrenheit, you turn to each other when it is time to help one family or the entire community. Maintaining healthy relationships to meet needs requires balance and reciprocity. When I left Kotzebue, we were discussing difficult challenges related to the steep decline in the Western Arctic caribou herd. In addition to the herd declining, their migratory patterns are changing, something our past stories handed down to us discuss. These changes mean that some communities have not seen caribou for multiple years. Many Inupiat stories discuss past declines and the famine that followed. One such steep decline led to an important exchange with the Sami, who brought reindeer to our communities to help ensure our survival. In some communities, the cost of fuel is too high, making hunter access difficult, which impacts their ability to provide caribou to their communities. We are looking to other resources like fish, but even these resources are challenged by changes in increased rainfall limiting harvest. Our concerns regarding caribou declines also includes the ability to maintain traditional practices we have in harvesting and sharing caribou and put pressure on the conversation around responsible resource development in the Arctic. In the face of these concerns, our hunters listened to each other, community members, and presentations from biologists and other researchers. They relied on the Inupiat Iloquisate to decide what to support with regulators and among themselves, as well as respecting other regions' views in the same management area. Inupiat Iloquisate. Inupiat meaning the real people, and Iloquisate meaning that which makes us who we are. With our Iloquisate in mind, they proactively advocated for a reduction in harvesting, citing both the results of studies done on the herd and our traditional knowledge that discusses maintaining balance in harvest. They also respected their decision to support these proposals is for our people's traditional range and not a decision that could be made for another part of the herd's range. Action, reaction, centered on the Iloquisate. Our elders remind us and help us to recenter on the Iloquisate, especially in tough circumstances. These 17 values continue to serve as a spiritual guide and a cultural touchstone. We measure the actions in our region and our regional leadership by them, and believe me, there is reaction among our people if upholding those values falls to the wayside, something I have direct experience with. We also seek to educate our development and business partners about our values because we know they lead to success in the Arctic. We know that systems strive always to reach equilibrium, and achieving balance is a pivotal part of our decision-making processes. Working through hard things, hard topics requires respect for others. It requires understanding when the system moves out of balance and committing to finding it. We experienced this when we decided to develop the Red Dog Mine, one of the world's highest producing zinc mines. In Alaska, Northwest Inupiat retained less than 10% of our traditional territory as private landowners, including mineral rights. A hard-fought battle, we only gained these rights in 1971, more than 100 years after the U.S. treaty with Russia. Our elders and young leaders looked at the challenges facing our communities at the time of land settlement. Little to no running water, no jobs for families to sustainably live in a mixed subsistence and cash economy, and more. They wanted a future where our people could have jobs, stay in their communities, and funds to support local government and services. So they moved forward, discussing the opportunity for mineral development on our traditional homelands. Our leaders used our values as a compass and took the questions to develop on the road, or rather the airplane. They traveled to each community and had difficult conversations about whether to proceed. Robert Ukalik-Newland and John Schaefer used the Iloquisate as their guide to work with our people to make this tough decision. The same compass was used in evaluating who would become our partner, who would be willing to enter into an agreement to develop indigenous lands while meeting our expectations of establishing requirements for training and hiring our people, building community capacity to ensure responsible development, and continuously working through protection of environment and our subsistence resources. We worked with our partners at Caminco and Now Tech to understand each other's perspectives and needs. We slowed down and talked, even when talking was the last thing we wanted to do. We knew that we needed development or our region would lack an economy and our young people would leave. Since Red Dog began operating, our region has grown by more than 1,300 people, and from 2020 to 2021, our median household income grew by 7.7%, even during the worldwide pandemic. But our development partners have benefited beyond earned income as well. They have a strong local workforce. 980 of our Inupiat people worked at the mine last year, comprising more than 60% of the workforce, earning over $55 million in wages. Our impact as partners is significant. Red Dog represents 80% of US zinc production and 4.2% of worldwide zinc production. Our regional government is funded by between 85 to 90% from mine operations since production began, supporting schools, search and rescue programs, and infrastructure development projects. In addition, NANA shares 70% of our earnings with other Alaska Native-owned corporations as required by ANCSA. Since production began, we have shared over $2 billion with all other Alaska Native corporations across the state. Because of this, the mine operates with regional and statewide support. It is by no means a perfect partnership. We still have tough conversations, but we anchor ourselves in our shared values in the Illiquistate and the need for mutual respect. We seek to listen and find solutions, even when it is the most difficult to do so. When a decision is made to develop, it is not a one-and-done conversation. It takes continuous commitment to understand varying views and using values to guide the way forward when balance is challenged. For my part at NANA, I meet quarterly with hunters and gatherers and subsistence committees to discuss continuous improvement processes to minimize or eliminate impacts to the wildlife and plants we rely on every day. And I'm here to tell you that development is possible in the Arctic where there is mutual respect, a commitment to understanding each other, and equity in the decision-making process. Regional decisions must be weighed locally with the necessary information for free, prior, and informed consent that includes Indigenous governments and people. More populous areas who do not understand that exclusion of investment and turning away from solutions that support responsible development lock out Arctic stakeholders from finding opportunities to participate in economic prosperity while maintaining alignment with our values. We take action together, we react together. We work toward equilibrium because systems in balance thrive. Processes must bring us together in order to allow for balance to be struck. Where there is pressure to exclude stakeholders, elders remind me to be curious and to listen, to challenge the assumptions that may exist that generate exclusion, because that is where we can learn and where solutions for a path forward may exist, because if we do not, we will be out of balance. The Arctic is facing some of the most challenging changes of our time, from climate to power struggles. In the face of these difficulties, it is essential, it is critical to come to the table to work towards equilibrium, to recognize that we have a shared future that must be determined together, in a space where there is equity for stakeholders to decide what that future will look like. Koyanak.
Very much. Liz Colo Carvalho, do come and join us here on the stage because you're going to be in the next panel. Thank you. That was fantastic. Thank you. And please do welcome our other panelists who are going to be joining this debate. So please welcome the Prime Minister of Norway, Jonas Gahr Støre. Welcome, Prime Minister. Thank you. Do take a seat. Also, please welcome John Desjarlais, who's the CEO of the Indigenous Resource Network from Canada. Hello there, John.
Thank you.
And please welcome Carina Sameli, who is the Mayor of Luleå in Sweden. Welcome, Carina. Great to have you with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good speaking.
Right, so first of all, I would really, before we delve into the development of natural resources and all that entails, Prime Minister, I was really struck by your speech last night and a certain phrase that you used, that we are at the sharp side of security politics. And I just want to ask you, what implications does that have for development in the High North?
Well, I think, as we touched upon in this opening session, that what has emerged in the Arctic over the last decades is a kind of new system of how you approach cooperation between countries, coastal states, affected groups, local communities, a whole kind of new network. That is security policy, that's international political governance development, under circumstances that were quite, inclusive and supportive, because the geopolitical situation invited that kind of approach. The Soviet Union became Russia. We could reach out across borders. We could travel across borders. Indigenous peoples could create networks across borders. They had very long lines in their history of those links, then cut by nation states, again opening up. So this, I would say, was a kind of helpful end of security politics, that it was an inviting environment. A full-fledged war in the middle of Europe, and one of these key actors engaging in a full-fledged military invasion creates a different environment. And as I said yesterday, these cold winds blowing in our region have not emerged from our region. They come from somewhere else, but they affect us. So what we have to deal with now as a government when we do our planning for our international relations, our security, our defense, is the sharp end of security, which means that you are closer to an additional danger, which is conflict. And we are, obliged to look into what does it mean to preserve security for our people today and in the years to come. We have to be, cautious and at the same time vigilant in the way we act. So in the whole way of working in international relations, in the policy outlook, I use this expression because security policy is a very broad notion. And for the last decades, we've been able to address really the human dimension of this. How do we enhance local communities, increase cooperation, lift dimensions that were not there before? It was a conducive environment for that. But now we live in a more tense situation, and that's why I'm so focused on preserving what has been created, not letting it be destroyed. At the same time, being very, very aware that the sharp end is really the prime obligation of any government. This is to preserve the security of its people.
And when it comes to the development of natural resources, what has Norway really learnt in the recent experience? And what can you also take from, say, for example, Liz's presentation?
Well, I think, again, this presentation, could you have given that 20, 30 years ago? The core of it, how local communities are affected by changes happening, is the same. I believe that we have developed over these years new mechanisms of consultations, of involvement. We have the Sami Act in Norway. We have the Sami Parliament being created. We have consultation processes, more inclusive processes in the way we also approach development of our natural resources. And we are learning lessons of where there have been mistakes. And I think the kind of open focus on this in conferences like this one, in the political debate lifts these issues and the interests of local communities, of indigenous people, of the obligations we have under international conventions to a new level.
Thank you. Well, let me continue with that train of thought, bring in John Desjarlais. John, you work with Indigenous workers and employers and businesses. What has really made the difference in terms of community buy-in for developments? Is there a shift away from that kind of paternalistic attitude to one, as Professor Young was talking about, of respect and trust, and mutual respect and trust?
Absolutely. First, I'd like to acknowledge I'm on the land of the Sami people, and so as an Indigenous person myself, I think that's appropriate and respectful. So thank you for having me as a guest. But yeah, to that question, the landscape is shifting. It's shifting in Canada, and it's shifting very rapidly. So Canada, built on the Indian Act, built on the Constitution and its relationship with Indigenous people, has certainly evolved to look at its relationships much differently, and especially in respect to resource development. And so jurisprudence says, and jurisprudence over the last 30 years says, challenging indigenous communities is not good business. It's not good governance, and it's made for very ineffective policy. So that's the growing sentiment. So the shift now you see is how do we treat indigenous communities as partners, not as stakeholders, not as someone where you're part of, or not as a community where you're part of a process, you check a box, you've effectively, satisfied a process through consultation, but how do you bring the communities in? How do you look at the relationship more equitably? And there's a lot of catalysts that help, I think, drive that sentiment. Truth and Reconciliation in Canada was an incredible movement, and it was a discovery process. Canada is taking responsibility for its relationship with the Indigenous people, and then there's the reconciliation part. And so that is really the underlying theme to how do we develop these relationships more meaningfully. And so now, and there's a growing trend, which is increasing at a great rate, is how do we bring in Indigenous communities? And that's how do we bring them in from an ownership perspective? How do we get them engaged and part of their own or part of the consultation process? Indigenous communities consulting Indigenous communities. Because we've had such a challenge with it, because it was paternal, because it was other people managing the interests and the rights of Indigenous people. So ownership now, and governance and authority, and also regulatory. And so there's hundreds of examples in Canada where Indigenous communities are buying in. There's another complication as well too. Canada's relationship with Indigenous people didn't lend itself well to an economic boom or development of those communities because they didn't have a land base. We didn't have a land base. We didn't have the assets to be able to leverage, so debt financing and any type of acquisition was challenging. So now governments regionally and federally more recently is moving in that direction, but regionally governments are backstopping, providing loan guarantees to communities so that they can invest into these opportunities as well too. And so that's what's changing. It's more and less, how do we manage the relationship, but how do we participate in development with Indigenous communities as true equitable partners? How do we ensure regulatory efficiency without compromising on the integrity of the intent of the process? How do we move things along at a greater pace, meet world demand, but still do it sustainably, still do it in line with reciprocity, our relationship with the land, stewardship, conservatorship, not compromising on those things, but moving development along at the pace the world needs. And
well,
yes.
That's crucial, isn't it? Moving that development on at the pace that the world needs. And Karina, I know that you're facing that very challenge. You want the process to move much more quickly, but how do you bring all local communities on board, but also those at a national level?
Yeah. And just to give you a hint of what I'm doing, I'm the mayor of Luleå, a city in northern Sweden, and there's a climate change going on. And this climate change is affecting people all over the world. We see it definitely in the northern Sweden and the Arctic. But this is also affecting the industries, trying to do a less impact. Because what is going on with the climate change is that we need to make other production lines. And we will need electrification, we will need other fuels, and we will need more minerals, rare minerals, but also the common minerals we use. We have them in northern Sweden. So right now we have major investments going on. In my city, we have like about 8 billion euros invested in new steel mills, in new rare earth minerals, in fertilizers, where the industries wants to reduce their carbon dioxide emissions. If we can close down the existing steel mill in Luleå, we will reduce the Swedish carbon dioxide with 8%. That's huge impact on the climate so that we will be able to live here. So when you know that you're working with something really, really good, because this will be good for Sweden, for Luleå, and for the world we're living in, then you have to do it together with the people living there. Because it's easy to, when these big things are happening and you see them happen in your backyard, because they are actually in my backyard. I see the steel mill from my window every day. You have to see, but we are people living here. We're 80,000 people. As I said, I see the steel mill, and I have to work to make sure that the voices of people living in Luleå, living in Norrbotten, because this is going on in the whole of northern Sweden, that they are included. And I am hired from the people in Luleå, so it's actually my job to make sure that they are in this. But it is a challenge, and we talk about it a lot and also talk with the industry that it's their job to make sure this is good for the people living here.
And if the process doesn't move fast enough, do you fear that you will risk losing these opportunities?
Yeah, we do.
Is that the challenge that you have right now?
Yeah, we do. That is definitely a challenge. We see that many European countries, also the US, Canada, are coming in seeing that this green transition of the industries are going on, and they want their industry to make the transition. Of course, every country wants to keep jobs and possibilities in their country. And as I said, this is about a green transition. It's about climate change. So we want them to move fast so that it can happen where it started, in Luleå, especially in the steel industry, because that's actually where the technique is being developed. So we want it to go on fast, but we also want it to include people. And that is a challenge in the Swedish system right now, because it's not that easy to see who will make the decisions. And then we have the national level, where we have a system with many national agencies, like they're responsible for the Sami rights, for the environment, for the water, for the air force, and it's not that easy to see, but who will decide what is the most important? Maybe stopping the climate change is a little bit more important than the air force this way, or maybe they are not. But that is very, very difficult to do. So we have to talk to the national level a lot, but also talk to people living in Luleå, and I see it as my job to make sure that they are involved. And as the Swedish legislation is, I have a voice in this, since a municipality, well, first of all, we own many of the land areas they want to buy from us, but also we have the right to plan how the area should be used. So that is also the way I can say, stop, you need to involve people. You need to think about the ones who will live close to the 3 times as big harbor. What are their light pollution, the noise? Can they live here in the future? Do they want to live here in the future? And that has to be on the same table when thinking about what is the most important thing right now.
Well, thank you. And let me put some of your points to the Prime Minister. Are you feeling the same types of frustration coming from local authorities in Norway about the fact that they often have their ear to the ground? They know that industry wants to move much more quickly, but actually sometimes the timescales are simply too long.
Well, first of all, I think the mayor is putting this in very straight terms, and as she sees it, from her vantage points. And I think we see the same thing in Norway, in local communities, with your colleagues. There are mayors here. We're living through 2 or 3 major transitions. Let geopolitics lie for a while, but we're living through the energy transition. We're going to move from fossil to renewables. That's a major transition in how we create that electricity that is renewable and green. How do we develop that? It cannot be done without any impact in nature. How do we consult from the start, get sufficient buy-in from local communities? We know more about how to do this in an inclusive way. I believe we have enough territory in our countries that we can do that in a way that balances the rights of traditional activities with these new needs. There's the climate transition. We feel the climate change more urgently here in the north. As I said to Dr. Young, it was news from the Arctic that really brought to the attention of the world climate change in total. So we're seeing it here. This is the canary
in the coal mine,
in the coal mine that is being observed. And the third one is the demographic transition. We are an aging population in our countries. We're going to adapt our health systems, our welfare systems to this change. And I believe these very profound changes can only succeed if you have inclusive processes from bottom up, top down. And they will be painful, but I think the way seen from a government perspective of neglecting those inputs from the people concerned may be tempting in the way that you can speed up things, but that's really the wrong approach, because you're going to be blocked down the road. So there's no way around having an inclusive process. Doesn't mean that you will agree on every matter, but it has to be. And I think we've come some way, but we still have some more way to go.
Well, there's a question that's come in from Kili Beausoleil, who says, is consultation with Indigenous peoples enough? Shouldn't we completely integrate these key perspectives and make them an integral component of ways of being in northern regions? The inclusion of digital voices, should they not be reworked to not be viewed as consultation, but this equal component?
Well, I mean, there are two sides to this. First of all, consultation is important. You know, that you are obliged at an early stage. Any matter which has an impact on the Sami population, we bring to the Sami parliament. It is not a co-decision process, but it is an important consultation process on education, on health, on industrial projects, and so on. And then, in addition, we are giving more, and this is a balancing act, decision power to the local community, to the mayor, on the planning in her region. But that has to be balanced, because we are, at the end of the day, we are a community, a bigger community than the local community. So we need to have the right balance between national legislation and the authority of parliament and government to make decisions on behalf of all of us, and local decision. And I believe that for this transition on energy, the first green steel, I think it will come from Sweden.
Yeah.
The first
From
green,
Luleå.
yeah, it may. And the first green aluminium, I think it can come from Norway. And it happens because we also involve the mayor. Sweden will do that, and we will do that to get the buy-in to succeed.
Thank you. Well, let me bring back in Liz. I mean, you've been hearing about this discussion, and I just want to focus as well on the fact that clearly you've made huge progress for your presentation, but you still have friction, don't you, within your community? You have to make difficult decisions. So do you sometimes have to accept that a company loses and doesn't get access? How do you really work through this friction? What's the best way of going about it?
It's a really, really great question, and I appreciate the dialogue with you all today. Something that I think John touched on that's really important is that element of what it means to be partners, true partners. And so when there are those elements of friction, how we work through those is coming to the table and thinking about where our values are and how they ground us. It's really important. In those places of friction, it's really taking the time to hear one another and identify where there may be solutions. Caribou is a conversation that impacts our mine site all the time. We have a 52-mile road that connects our mine to a port site, and then our marine mammals come into the conversation. I'm a coastal Inupiaq woman. My family's harvested bearded seal for generations. We have family members who participate in whaling, and so shipping activity and the International Maritime Organization come into that conversation. So in those points of friction, I think a good example is when we find ways to bring those local harvesters to the table through our subsistence committee that we have at the mine site. We talk through those problems, we identify some solutions, and then we work on observing together, and research does come to the table. They're a part of that dialogue as well. And there are times when we do lose out. We have, the mine is currently expected to close in 2031 on Nana lands. We're looking towards state lands, and we're having a conversation about a 7-mile road to extend out to that area. And the conversation around caribou still comes to the table, is how do we continue to coexist successfully with caribou and address community concerns? And those are my family members. I'm responsible and accountable to them, similar to the mayor, similar to John, and as well as you, Prime Minister. And so we have to come together to figure out what that future looks like. I remember the first time I was here in Norway, there was a lot of conversation about the demographic shift of people who are younger to the south. We face that challenge too. If we don't have a sustainable economy and our young people move south, that also means that we won't be able to continue a lot of our traditional practices. So it's imperative that we come to the table where there's that conflict.
Yes, thank you for that shared experience. John, let me bring you in and see if you could get your view on a question that's come in from the floor. The value metrics of our economic systems of growth and accumulation, this needs to be examined and challenged at every step of the business creation process, because if we don't alter the conceptions of value that drive our economic systems, we're not building systems of reciprocity. So how do we redefine our definition of value to reflect the virtues of local communities, and how can we rethink systems to support this? Do you think you've already rethought systems in some way?
Yeah, I think so in some way. I think one of the values-driven perspectives that's important to touch on is that relational aspect. I think Liz mentioned, building trust. And where does that come from? Where I'm from, I'm Cree Métis, and so Cree Nenau is a language group in Canada, and so there's a concept called Minimum Matswin, which is how do we live a good life, and it's how we define that is not just in simple terms, not just what my bank statement looks like, what my assets look like. It's how do I live in relation to everything around me, and that's the world around me, and that's the people around me. And so a lot more has to be done and has been done in understanding that value. And so a lot of the language I'm hearing, and it was great conversations last night I was hearing about what is the economic impact, what is the socioeconomic impact, positive and negative, and really understanding those things, but understanding those things from the Indigenous community, because those impact measures are not necessarily lining up very well with, well-being index and traditional socioeconomic or Western-based socioeconomic indicators. And so working with community to understand what matters to them. Another thing I heard yesterday was intergenerational healing. How do we measure that? In Canada, we have that relationship, where policy was about assimilation, was about destroying the Indian. And so now, as we walk through and move through and devolve those relationships and understand how do we build good relationships with Indigenous communities and people, and how do we do it from a value-centered perspective, so that we can lift those communities out of abject poverty and understand what drives those communities to bring true partnership. And all that means that we have to challenge our idea of value. Project development, is still incredibly important and always will be, what's the financial risk of this project? What's the financial reward? And then communities are really tired of bearing the environmental risk. Local communities are tired of bearing the environmental risk without realizing an equitable position on the financial reward. And so how do we understand what's equitable, what's right for those communities, understand the impact, take those measures past some of our traditional, and environmental, but understand things like ESG, dive deeper into those social impacts of those communities that matter, so that we can tie development, operations, progress to how we're making the lives of some of these communities better. And so that's where that value piece really organizes around.
Thank you. I think Liz wanted to make a point on this.
I just wanted to add for a moment to something, and I can be so bold as to claim this is probably a bit overreach. So Red Dog, right, was developed in the 80s, and prior to ESG being a thing, right? It is an important thing we're seeing now in investment. And nowadays, I think something that not many people are aware of is the goodwill, the value that we bring to the table when we are partners, and what it means when we have conversations around value chain and where resources come from and the care that people have about that, and the way that we can lift our partners up in centering those values in the work that we do. So there is a real financial impact and an opportunity to attract investment through these partnerships, and recognition that when you have communities that are tired of bearing that brunt, but there may be solutions that are workable for both the industry and the communities, it can be very powerful, not only to meeting those needs, but to both in attracting investment and opportunities for the future. So it's not only the practical, tangible, social economic impacts, it's also what it means to attracting investment and future projects in the green economy.
Thank you. So certainly that's a challenge that you're really facing right now, Karina. But John also talked about this building trust. Yeah. Can that be difficult sometimes when you feel hampered by what you can't say? So, for example, if you've got access to sensitive, classified information, how challenging is that?
Well, that is very challenging, and especially in Luleå, since we have many companies coming in. Actually, this morning I had phones of 3 of them, and I couldn't say what the others were saying. And then it's difficult because that's their affair, secrecy. So, and then you can't talk about it to the people living here, trying to get them to understand what's going on. So that is a huge challenge right now when a lot is going on at the same time. And when the industries are making their transition, there are needs created all over northern Sweden. I mean, we need new roads, new railroads, new ports. We need electricity production. We need windmills. We need electricity grid. We need hydrogen pipes. And this will affect people not only close to the factories or the industries, it will affect people all around. And it's difficult to understand that, this has to work out. And maybe sometimes, I often know things like, they plan to go this area, this will be difficult, but it's not even in my municipality, and I can't tell anyone. But the solution is to talk early and to get the trust to sit together before you made your decisions and find your own solutions. And that is difficult. I'll take an example from our harbor. We don't own our harbor. It will be about 3 times as big. My technicians working in the harbor, making it 3 times as big, they want all the answers before they talk to someone. And that's like their pride in their job. They want to be able to answer the noise, the sound, how many boats will be there. And I'm like, no, you have to talk to the people who are affected on the islands before you have all the answers. They tell them what they are worried about, and then you get the answer to that, not guessing what they are worried about. But like being proud and being, especially in a private company, you definitely want all the answers. Who will be affected? Why? When? How can we do it? How can we solve it? Before you talk to people, and then it's so easy to forget someone. And for the Sami people, especially in northern Sweden with reindeer herding, it's a problem because they get like 10 different interests calling them like, is it this okay? And then 2 weeks later, it's like, this okay? But the cumulative, what's the total effect? No one is responsible for that. And that's a challenge. So I don't know the solutions, but I am 100% sure that we have to get the trust to talk to each other about the problems and then find the solutions together. And then find the solutions that I usually say that no one loves, but everyone can live with. That's good enough.
Is that it? The solutions that no one loves, but everyone could live with?
Yeah, it's a good point. I think some of this we can legislate and have procedures. Some of this we have to innovate. But I'll come back to what Dr. Young said in his remarks. You know, we need narratives. We need to develop narrative. What is a narrative? Well, it is a kind of a common storyline of where we come from and where we are heading. And of course, you don't define that we have a narrative that will expire 31st of December that year, and we have to develop a new one. This is this is the fourth transition in a way. We need the transition of the narratives. And I think to take in, since we are in the Arctic now, what will be the narrative of the Arctic for the next decades in the geopolitical situation that we have? You know, there are 8 coastal states around the Arctic. One of those 8 states are now kind of kept on the outside for obvious reasons. How do we take that into account? We have done a lot of progress on how we involve indigenous groups, local communities. How do we take that forward? And one last remark, you know, what we did in the 90s was to create a new form of an international system, where in the Barents region, for the first time, you gave foreign policy obligations, rights, opportunities to local communities and to regional communities. You know, to the counties of the north of our countries with the Russian other side. This was really explore a new terrain. And the fact that one of these Arctic states, the biggest one, Russia, is now where it is, should not take away our, you know, interest in developing this approach further. And I think Norway, Sweden, and Finland, with its northern approach here in this region, should take it on. That's why we have in the Barents region now a co-presidency between the 3 countries. We should highlight and appreciate the role of the regions, of the local communities, and take that forward. Because this is, as I've seen it, you know, taking a step back, this is true innovation to the international system. And some of the pioneers in working on this have been invited to go to entire other regions in the world to say, how did you develop this new thing? Because again, some decades ago, the Arctic to the global conversation was unknown, ungovernable, terra nullus, but it isn't. And that's why we have to, I like very much that approach of developing new narratives that can bring us together and inspire also decision making.
When you talk about new narratives, there's a question that's come in from Anita Holgram. Would Norway consider to bring in indigenous communities into ownership and development of green industries, windmills in the Norwegian Arctic?
Obviously, I mean, would you do that in terms of being an indigenous group? Well, it will have to be in your capacity of engaging in this. You know, my Minister of Industry has now been very focused on how we can, through our industrial policies, support initiatives among the Sami youth, you know, with a lot of entrepreneurial ideas on how you can develop services, products, and these new industries. So not only being involved from the fact that you are elected or you matter in terms of numbers, but also you matter in terms of the ideas and the knowledge. And obviously we as a national community, have a lot to learn from the way the Sami people have lived in concert with nature over the years, and to bring that into also our decision-making process.
Thank you. John, it's interesting, I want to pick up on what the Prime Minister said about, the demands of young people in particular. Mm-hmm. Do you see a kind of demographic split between younger people who really do potentially, I don't know whether this is the case, see future opportunities in new economic development, as opposed to older generations who perhaps are more fearful about changing the status quo?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's certainly some exciting things going on, almost like a renaissance. There's, I didn't hear much about it, but I mean, something that's going on across North America, across the world, is self-determination, right? So indigenous people are starting to drive their own direction, starting to create their own identities, that are rooted in culture and a lot of things like that. And that's driving, initiation and policy, but initiation in entrepreneurship. And so we're seeing incredible interest from indigenous community and young people to invest or to participate on the transition, on energy projects, on green energy projects. In Canada, I think there's 200 communities that have some play in a renewable energy project, whether it be solar, whether it be wind, and then of course in some of the non-renewable energy projects as well too. Indigenous people are participating in all those industries. In the non-renewable and some of the conventional energy technologies, indigenous people are looking for ways to innovate. How do we reduce footprint? How do we reduce emissions intensity? So how do we be indigenous? How do we assert kind of that stewardship, some of those values on reciprocity, and then participate in these different industries, and bring my whole self, and so that we can participate and then support global initiatives and emission reduction and things like that. But yeah, indigenous youth in particular are getting incredibly excited about who they are as indigenous people, and again, embracing their identity and bringing their identity and their values to entrepreneurship and to the workplace, and that's making a big difference. We feel it.
Thank you very much. We're nearly out of time, but we did discuss this a little earlier, Karina. You clearly have a lot of challenges in front of you. What would you do if you were Prime Minister? What changes would you make to make your job as mayor easier?
Good thing I'm not Norwegian. First of all, I would make sure that you have to co-plan early, to involve people early. Today, our processes in Sweden is like thinking together is the last part before you get your permission. You have to change that so you think together first. Otherwise, you'll be doing the wrong things, and we do not have time for doing the wrong things for 3 or 5 years. And the second thing is that we have many, as I said, many different national agencies deciding on different topics, and who should make the total decision about what is the best. And I'm a politician, I believe in democracy. I think that should be someone who's elected who should be that. And if people are not pleased, they can vote for someone else the next time. That's how democracy works. So I think it's important to get back all those decisions into the government so that the Prime Minister can say, well, we did this decision, we know that will hurt you and you, but it's good for this, and that's our choice. Today, those choices are not that visible in Sweden. They are underground. And the same thing on my level. I mean, I can make decisions. I have to be able to talk what decisions I may and tell it. And if people are not pleased, well, they can fire me. That's how democracy works.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
I think what she should do is to become Prime Minister.
Well, you certainly have the enthusiasm and drive for that. You can absolutely tell. Let me just give the last word to Liz. Liz, what would you like to see happen? I mean, you've obviously made so much progress. Mm-hmm. What could really move the dial for even further progress for you?
Something that consistently excites me, and I'm so disappointed that I wasn't able to make it for the emerging leaders, just the young our Arctic Ambassadors dialogue. I think there is strength and wisdom in our youth as well in looking at how transparency looks in the future. So one of the things that I did not touch on is when we have community conflict, often in miscommunication and bringing transparency to the situation is a big part of it, similar to what you shared, right? So bringing that element from the front end, seeing what we can do to take some processes and flip them, do a 180 on them so that we're engaging earlier often, and then we have transparency throughout so that there's support for future projects, engagement on how to improve them. And if there was anything I could do, that's probably a big element, is bring our youth wisdom into that. What does transparency look like for the next 50 years, and integrate that sooner?
Well, thank you very much. Thank you. And thank you very much to Liz and Karina. I've loved having you on this panel. Please do give them a round of applause. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Because John Desjarlais will be staying for the next panel, and Prime Minister, can you stay as well, just for a moment? Thank you very much, Liz. Thank you. Thank you. Prime Minister, I'd like you to stay for a moment because we have this video that I would really like you to watch, and I'd like to get your reaction just after it, so thank you.
What future do we want?
What future do you want
to leave behind?
Sustainability is meeting the needs of the present without compromising the needs of the future. We are a generation that is experiencing dramatic and irreversible change to our environment and livelihood.
2023 was marked by climate disaster, with the Arctic warming 4 times faster than global average. We are scared for what's next.
The rate of nature and biodiversity loss are reaching mass extinction levels.
We are facing the consequences of our parents' choices. Will we keep stealing from our children?
Our Arctic is a land of opportunity, but far too often, the value we create drains south.
How will you ensure this value stays in the hands of our Arctic communities?
And how will you ensure it's used to build opportunities for our future generations?
We must act now.
We envision a future where Arctic and Indigenous peoples, alongside plants, animals, waters, and lands, have stakes, responsibility, power, and voice in all development and decisions about our homes of the future.
So some big questions there from our emerging leaders. So Prime Minister, you know, the big question there is, how do we ensure that value stays at the hands of Arctic communities and builds opportunities for future generations? That really was the theme of the panel. How can you sum up really an answer to that pretty pressing question?
Well, I mean, to make it simple, I would agree with the last statement. You know, that there is a future where they have a voice, where they have a decision, where they have a contribution to make. The challenge is that there's no easy, simple answer to it. There's a complex answer. So, you know, climate change is more severely felt in the north, in the Arctic. We know, it's stated here, we can see it. But it will also matter, you know, will Vietnam go for more coal-fired plants or go for renewable? Will India succeed its transition? Will Africa, with its growing population, go down the road of fossil, or will they go renewable? And will we be there to make that difference? So perhaps the biggest difference we can make for the Arctic is made on the other side of the globe. That's why, you know, we have to look, we cannot be depressed and you know, set out by climate change being felt. We have known that we will have to live with climate change. It's happening. So mitigation is one thing. And how we can reverse it is about succeeding these transitions. And this will be major global complex decisions. That's why the COP28, where there were low expectations, we came out of COP28, I think, with a roadmap which gives us an inspiration and direction, because we are in this transition. So it's maybe not a very precise answer, but it is simply by saying, to succeed these young people's vision, we need to do our work in the Arctic, as we do at this conference, with the governance, with the involvement, with listening to the people. And then we have to understand where are the key decisions to be made in this transition. And in the energy transition, I mean, not much energy is spent in the Arctic. The local communities, the indigenous communities, don't spend much energy, but it is the way the world consumes energy that will determine what this will look like. And that's why I think, you know, investing in storage and battery capacity for Indonesia's transition is going to be key to the results we're going to see up here. And this is not to distance our responsibility from our local responsibility, because this is my major political engagement. But in order to deal with that, we have to put it on the agenda where it belongs, and that is the global agenda, with the sharp end of security policy.
Well, thank you very much, Prime Minister. We really, really do welcome your participation in this panel.
Thank you.
So thank you. So I'd now like to invite up to the stage the next few panelists to delve into this viewpoint and so many more issues that we have to discuss. So please welcome Greta Birgitte Holland, who is the Senior Vice President of Exploration and Production North for Equinor. Welcome. Thank you. And also please welcome Nagruk Harcharek, who is the President of the Voice of the Arctic in UPAT from the United States. Welcome.
Thank you.
We are also welcoming online Sigurd Rafaelsen, who's the Mayor of Lebesby Municipality in Norway. Hello there, Sigurd. Great to have you on the panel. Thank you. Unfortunately, Pierre Lindstrom wasn't able to make this panel, but of course we do have, some fantastic voices and so much more to discuss. I don't know, Greta, if you were able, you saw the video, and I just want to get your take on it, really. How do you think, from Equinor's point of view, that value can really stay at the hands of Arctic communities? How can you, as a company, help build opportunities for future generations?
Maybe I could start a bit. Do I have...
Just move it down a tad.
Do I have noise here? Or...
It's not. I don't think it's working. I wonder if we can get another microphone from the stage, from the floor. Before we do that, what I'm going to do, while they bring you another microphone, I'm going to get John's perspective on the video, because you were sitting on stage, and I'd really like to get your viewpoint on that. How could you sum up what we need to do going forward? We've talked about your experience in the past, but what do we need to do to move the dial in the future?
So one of the things, I guess something that's said by a lot of indigenous communities is nothing about us without us. And so, how do we ensure that value stays within communities, and is we ensure that we involve those communities in understanding. We heard about involving people up front before decisions are made, and so that's incredibly important. Involving youth, before decisions are made, and so in part of that opportunity exploring exercise, and so I think that's incredibly important. But also important to that is, I think, reiterating what Prime Minister said, that the energy crisis or climate crisis is a global phenomenon, and we really struggle in Canada because, we're not one of the major contributors in terms of emissions, yet we supply a lot of the natural resources for energy production. And so how do we support this transition? There's a large play in Canada to develop natural gas as a transition fuel to offset the development of coal, which is much higher emissions intensity producing energy. And so Indigenous people are very much part of that conversation. Where they're also feeling engaged and part of the helping to kind of transition and move away to less or move away from those high emission intensity energies to less emission and to renewables as well too. And so involving organizations up front is incredibly important. Involving communities up front is incredibly important. Decisions shouldn't be made in isolation somewhere out of corporate office or government. It should be involved in that democratic process where it's supported by people. So.
Well, let me bring you back, Greta. Now, I think you've got the comms. So what is your take on this, ensuring that the value does stay in communities? What can Equinor do to provide those opportunities?
And maybe I should start a bit also saying, for those of you that don't know Equinor that well, we are an international energy company with a headquarters in Norway. We have 22,000 employees working in 30 countries. And actually, we have been in the northern Norway for almost 50 years now. And we still have long-term plans for this area. And currently, we are the largest energy supplier to Europe. And our ambition is also to be leading in the energy transition. And Northern Norway is and will be also very important in that transition. And for us, when we are developing natural resources and when we're also going to change into new supply sources, then it is extremely important that we are creating ripple effects, that we are creating jobs, that we are creating benefit for the society. And we work structurally with this. And the way we are doing it, it is by working with local suppliers, developing them, taking them into our portfolio. It is about also going into strategic cooperation with big suppliers with a very clear expectation to them that they are going to have local content in that. But it's also about capacity and competence. It is about having cooperation with schools and universities, and also having a recruitment program for this area. And I can maybe give you two recent examples of what we have been doing. And that is for last year, we went into a cooperation with Honningsvåg Upper Secondary School, Honningsvåg videregående skole, where we invested with our partners about 60 million NOK, upgrading that school with ambition for us to use that center for training our people in Arctic environment. Because when we operate in an Arctic environment, it is also in competence to be and do operations there. So we train our people there. And by that, we create ripple effects, we create jobs, we create also a situation where more people are traveling in and out for that community, and also increasing the competence of our people and the local students. And another thing that we also did last year was that we and our partners, we established 2 new companies that is going to do 3D printing. One in Helgeland and one in Hammerfest. And we also invested and bought the printer in itself. And this is open for the whole industry. It's not only us going to use that, but it is definitely something that we are going to use, because it will mean that we will be able to 3D print spare parts. It will also reduce the CO2 footprint, because it will be a local manufacturing of the spare parts. So the travel distance will be definitely less. And by this cooperation, we think that we are able to create sustainable business, local business, and also develop new competence for us and for the society, and having it locally.
Okay, well, thank you for those different examples as well. I'll come back to a bit more in a moment, Greta. But Nagruk, I'd like to ask you, you've really had experience in the past in your community and adapting very rapidly to the changing economic landscapes, certainly similar to what we're seeing today, while ensuring that native Alaskan communities are included. What lessons, though, does it present for today? What are your concerns going forward?
Plenty. I would say that adaptation happened, like you said, really quick. 1971, Liz talked about the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. Our people quickly went from hunters, gatherers, all of a sudden we had to be businessmen, mayors, things like that. So we had to adapt quickly. We embraced it quickly, I think, because we've seen the benefits that would bring to the communities. A lot of them were impoverished, a lot of them still, but we have opportunities. We were able to bring, through taxation, through the North Slope Borough, first world living conditions into many of the communities on the North Slope that I represent, running water and sewer, things that we take for granted, search and rescue, police and fire protection, things like that. So that adaptation was, I think, welcome, but it did have to happen fast. So as we talk about kind of this green transition and going forward, some of the concerns are, a lot of people don't talk about that economic base, right? So not only are our energy systems and our homes and power provided by that resource development, by that oil and gas development, specifically on the North Slope, our economy is based on that. 95% of that North Slope borough income comes from the taxation of the oil and gas infrastructure up there. So as we think about the future and we think about this transition, it's not just energy systems that we need to think about transitioning, especially for our communities. It's what are we going to do to make sure that that income that the borough relies on to provide for those communities doesn't dry up as well, because all of a sudden you introduce regression. People, they can't support their communities anymore because they don't have that economic base, right? And the ideas are great for small local businesses up there, but is that realistic for, I mean, the North Slope Borough's budget is $400 million to support 8 communities. That tells you how expensive things are on the North Slope. So what do you do to replace that, all the while think about transitioning to a greener style of energy production?
And there's a lot of speculation about the fact that you may get greener jobs and your communities could be in reach, but it's a lot of words, not action, is it at the moment?
Lots of words, right? We've had conversations even in DC where that question has been posed, right? You talk about this transition, but what do you expect us to do? What kind of options do you have, right? We were put in this position where we would make money off of our lands essentially by the federal government. And now when we pose that question to the federal government again, it's like, well, we're going to transition and it's up to you. You have to decide what you want to do economically, right? So at one point we were essentially, the lands were being exploited for oil, for profit. We put ourselves in a position to be able to benefit from that. And now that that's shifting, we're trying to position ourselves to benefit from that too, but the things aren't lining up necessarily for us. So it makes things very challenging and very concerning for our future.
What is Equinor's take on this just transition?
You know, I think for us it is extremely important that when we are operating in an area, we do it safely. And also that our ambition is to do that with zero harm to the environment. But at the same time that we are creating something back to the community, ripple effects, that we are there for a longer term, that we are able to contribute positively. That being increasing also the competence in the area, making sure that people thrive in the area. I say that we have a lot of interesting tasks to work on. So I say to the mayors that if you can kind of make people stay in the north, as Elizabeth was also talking about in the panel before, you know, one of the big challenges that we have is actually having enough people in the northern area to work on all the tasks that we have and to create the ripple effects. And I think, talking to the mayor of Luleå, where they have actually been able to change that process, and they have now people coming into the area. And I think that is the way that we should try to kind of make these local communities lively and have a long-term future on it. But we need to work together. And I very much like the Professor Young's narrative about how we kind of create this coexistence and how we build on each other and how we do that through dialogue and trust.
Well, you mentioned mayors, and let's bring in Sigurd Rafaelsson. Hello, Sigurd. I mean, in your day-to-day work, you have to do just this, don't you? Really grapple with coexistence, balance lots of interests from local communities and Sami communities. What are the building blocks you use? What are the best ways of going about this?
Well, first of all, we have a very good legislation in Norway. We can talk about the wrongdoings of the past, but Norway is a pioneer when it comes to indigenous rights. And that is important to acknowledge also today when we're talking about narratives in what is Norway today. And we have coexistence. We've had coexistence for decades and for hundreds of years. And you can see that you have the development of the industry in Finnmark, and you have the development of also the increase in amount of reindeers. So you have coexistence. We've always adapted to each other, and it works. So the example in Finnmark is we have wind plants in Berlevåg, in Båtsfjord, in Kjøllefjord, and it works. So I think the narrative is that we can do this, and we have also now a legislation and processes that that work in realizing the projects. So I think one of the things we have to do is to actually make a decision at some point and to get the processes running also on a state level, which have stopped for a couple of years. But I think we have a good legislation to do this right. And also when it comes to fair compensation to the local communities, this is also part of the government plan for this government. The rural platform is to give more to the communities that give space to produce renewable energy and among other things. And in the petrol legislation and oil, the ripple effects we're talking about, that is a part of the legislation. That is, you have to make ripple effects in societies where you have also business. So for us, it's all about acknowledging that we've always have been together. There's a Sami term for it, Verdevåta, that means friend and also that you trade. It's a term where you trade between when the reindeer herders come to their summer grazing and meet with the sea Samis and how they act together. And that's a bond of respect and friendship and interdependence. So it's always been there, and I think we have to focus on our common challenges, and the climate change is the biggest challenge for us in the Arctic. We are living of the nature, whether it's the fish, the fish farming at sea, the reindeer herding, or agriculture, and we live by the nature, and we have a common responsibility to do it. And especially after the Plan and Building Act, which gives all the authority to the municipalities in developing wind power. So we have a responsibility to make research to find out, can we produce wind power in our community, or should we let someone else do it? Because we have to make a change, and we are dependent on it.
Yeah, so real decision making based on knowledge, which is a big theme, of course, in this conference. So thank you very much, Sigurd. Let me bring you back in, John. We've got a question that's come in from the audience from Tabor Noteboom, who says, might a shift towards sustainable and locally driven business models in the Arctic contribute to long-term economic resilience? Well, there is that shift, that's what you may think, but obviously we've heard from Nagruk about the concerns about actually how long-term resilience might be not for some communities by this shift if there isn't a real strategic plan to make sure that when oil and gas opportunities fall away, there is already opportunities for green energy set up and ready to get going.
Mm-hmm. It's a very, very complex problem, because one of the things that, I think we certainly don't talk often enough, especially at an international stage, is all the challenges and the group mentioned this, all the challenges of poverty, abject poverty, not just fiscal poverty, but the poverty in terms of outcomes, health, education, and everything like that. And there's so many of those gaps that exist. So also having to contemplate a transition, meaning to reskill, to consider different economies, to be entrepreneurial, are that much more challenging and complex. And so how do we address, the issues of the day that are historically informed in terms of some of those socioeconomic gaps, but at the same time build the resilience, the capacity, the competence, the capability, so that communities can pivot quickly, which is being requested of them, policy is being asked of them, especially communities very much where their economies are reliant on things like oil and gas. Something we work with a lot of workers and businesses, a lot of them said, we've just become competitive. We've just finally been able to figure things out where not necessarily competitive, but at least being able to make a living, a livelihood. And now I have to figure out how I'm going to do this, in addition to dealing with, I think, a lot of the things that local communities, struggle with. In the indigenous communities, so suicide ideation is multiples higher. Educational disparities are multiples higher than the average population. And so we've got all these issues, and then think about, what does policy look like to support, not drive those issues even further and drive those gaps further, but what does policy look like so that we can support reskill, move into different economies, be entrepreneurial, look at our market opportunities, and then pivot, and then be successful and still continue to grow and thrive as communities. And I think a lot of local communities are worried about some of those issues as well too, because they don't have the benefits of urbanization, of the infrastructure, and so those issues are compounded, much more complex, and I think need to be understood and appreciated, not just at the international, but even just at the local, the national, the government level, the organization, the corporate level. I think they need to be understood in great detail. So.
Thank you, John. And picking up on that entrepreneurship theme, and just how crucial has it been for entrepreneurs to flourish in your communities, to have that outside funding?
It's been we've seen it most recently. Like I said earlier, historically we kind of had to become forced into becoming entrepreneurs, even though the corporations were set up by federal governments. But for-profit corporations, we could now participate in free market capitalism. It's helped our communities tremendously. I think between 1971, when ANCS was passed, and I believe the late 1900s, 1980, 1990. The life expectancy of somebody on the North Slope increased by 14 years, right? That's extremely significant because we had access to these new things. Most recently, though, from an entrepreneurial perspective, we've recently started building what we call a community winter access trail. It's a road that goes from Prudhoe Bay, where the main highway system ends, and they build a snow trail, essentially hardened snowpack trail to Barrow and a couple of the outerlying villages. What that did, it spurred kind of local entrepreneurship. A couple of folks bought big trucks, put big tires on them, tracks, started transporting freight between the metropolitan areas, Fairbanks, Anchorage, all the way up to Barrow. Building materials, I think they transport over 100 vehicles a year now, just about on average. So a place like Utkasuk that is not on any sort of barge system, you can now just go to Anchorage, buy a truck, and drive it there. Barrow gets 100 new vehicles every year, so it's been. People are building homes now because they could go down to the local lumber shop down south, transport those materials affordably to Barrow, and build their own home in a place where a housing crisis is paramount across the North Slope. So it's been huge, right? And that's just a winter, not a permanent road. So you can imagine what it might be like if there was a permanent road system put in. But with that comes also challenges as well that obviously have to be looked at.
And you're obviously fearful that these types of opportunities might fall by the wayside if you don't have a guarantee investment into being a part of the green
100%, and a lot of the funding for that snow trail, some of it's from the state, but a lot of it's from the North Slope Borough and funded through that taxation, right? That kind of self-determination idea. More simply, it's freedom, essentially, to participate. But that idea of self-determination and having an economic backing to be able to pursue that more actively, I think, is extremely important.
Well, thanks very much. There's a couple more questions that have come in, which is specifically for you and Equinor, Greta. So they're of a similar theme. How can Equinor regain public trust and credibility while operating in an industry that's often associated with environmental concerns and greenwashing? I mean, as somebody's pointing out the fact that, as well, it can sound a little bit hypocritical to talk about the green transition and, say, 3D printing when Equinor is 99% based on fossil fuel extraction. What is your take on that? How would you respond?
We have a threefold strategy. It is about optimizing the oil and gas production and operations that we are doing while we are also reducing our CO2 footprint. So our ambition there is that we're going to reduce our CO2 emissions by 50% by 2030 and close to zero by 2050. And that's the reason for why we now have taken a huge decision up at Melkøya, where we are investing about 13 billion NOK to reduce the CO2 emission at Melkøya. And Melkøya actually is one of our largest emitters. So this will really impact the CO2 emissions that we are having in Norway. In addition to that, we also are going to increase and step up in renewables. So our ambition there is that half of what we are investing in 2030 is going to go to the renewables. And in addition to that, we're also going into, and I can say that that will be maybe most likely offshore wind. And we're very much looking forward to what is now happening at the NCS, and that there will be areas along the whole coast going forward. But in addition to that, we're also going into new value chains, like CCS, carbon capture and storage. We have competence there from our oil and gas business, going now into the new value chains, and we are doing that in southern Norway. Would very much like to expand that in the rest of Norway and in Europe as well. And when recently also we went into a gas agreement with CFE in Germany, a huge gas supply agreement, but it also includes a common ambition of going into CCS and hydrogen. So we are actually already now taking steps going into that transition.
But why are you still pursuing new fossil fuel projects at the same time? What's the take on this? This is the question coming in, for example, the Rosebank project.
Yeah. The reason why we also explore for oil and gas is that we need these hydrocarbons to create the new fuels. So when we are talking about the hydrogen and the hydrogen economy and how big that will be in the future, our way of contributing to that is to use our CCS technology, taking out the CO2, and then have a clean hydrogen going into the energy mix. But I think we also need to acknowledge that this is a transition. The world needs energy today. So we need to build this going forward. So we cannot just kind of stop doing oil and gas business, but we need to do that in a very wise way. And that's the reason why I say we have very ambitious targets in Norway, and we are very much loyal to those targets and are also investing into that now in order for us to contribute, and also our strategy shows that.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I just want to bring back in Sigurd for now. Obviously, the green transition necessitates this transition towards greener, cleaner fuels, including wind turbines. We have had the controversy, still have, of Fosen. Do you think this could happen in Finnmark and northern Norway in general? If not, why not? What groundwork have you put in place to enable that, a communication among local communities right from the start?
You have the law of consultation, and that wasn't there before. And also you have built windmills in Finnmark that hasn't made a Fosen conviction. So there are, in every area, there are different aspects and different geography, different amount of reindeers. And in Finnmark, I don't think there is an immediate danger that the Sami culture of reindeer herding will extinct. And that's a part of also doing these processes, researching the consequences, and making a good consultation, because it's in all our interest to prevent climate change, and that is. Last year, when coming to summer grazing, you had to take the reindeers in a truck using the road, and of course that is not the nomadic culture of the Sami people using trucks. So we are changing our ways of doing our culture due to both because we are living in a modern society, but also because our reindeers are prevented from grazing where they should be grazing before, because of climate change. So there are many things to take into accord, and I think to have a respect for the initial stand of every stakeholder is very important. I will never say when someone says this is going to extinct my business. I will never say you're lying, but you have to accept that that's the initial stand, and then you have to find ways to move forward together, because Finnmark is also vast, and it's also different. There's different geography in Sør-Varanger, in Vadsø, in Kautokeino, in Lebesby. So you have to find the best projects and also have talk about and have a good dialogue about what is the best projects, where can they be, and it's hard because there are also many emotions. So sometimes the facts are more important. The facts are not as important as the emotions, and that can also be an issue when you're choosing what project is the best. And for us, we've sent out an invitation to the reindeer herders to prioritize between our project, because we have seven companies who want to develop wind power in Lebesby. So we've asked the reindeer herders which of these seven is the best for your activity, and it is our responsibility to preserve the Sami culture, and that we take it very seriously and work intensely on making good processes, have open processes, and respectful processes. And it's a part of our lifestyle, it's part of our history, and we will always move forward together.
Okay, Sigurd, thank you very much. Well, Anna Gruka, we talked there about compromise. What kind of difficult compromises would you say that you've had to make when it comes to the use of land and resources?
Good question. So part of ANCSA, we were allotted land from the federal government, right, as well as money for land lost. And now we have control over those lands and have to make determinations on, like Liz talked about, whether or not we want to utilize that land for preservation of culture and subsistence activities, or do we want to use that land for economic development, making money? Do we want to put a mine, for example, on the North Slope? Our regional corporation has lands and subsurface rights to oil and gas resources. Is that something that they want to pursue, right? So as things move forward and new projects potentially come online in some new areas, those kinds of decisions are going to have to be made, and those are very difficult decisions that include the whole of the population of the North Slope to determine whether or not that's something that we want to pursue. Even with all of the economic benefits that we see on one side, is that really something that we want to move forward with? So those are the kinds of compromises that we would have to make. As well as, I mean, there was the offshore thing a few years ago with Shell, right? They were going to do it whether or not we were involved, because we didn't have control over the waters necessarily. But the corporation said they're going to do it, either without us or without us, and so we're going to engage, right? Because we're going to try to benefit as much as we can, at least financially, to be able to provide for the people, right? So it's constant compromises. The ultimate one being, we're just going to flip the switch off, and you guys have to go figure out what you're going to do for the future, right? Now we can't afford to buy snowmobiles to subsist, or boats or things, right? And without that economic benefit and without the support for the communities, you start to lose those communities. When you start to lose those communities, you lose, essentially the culture is going to dry up and die, and that's definitely not something that we want, and I don't think anybody in this room would want that as well.
Certainly not. And I wanted to pick on that point as well with you, Greta, what Sigurd was making about this you have to have priorities, and you have to have the facts and the data to be able to make those choices. To what extent do you think that will get the right research, the right technology, the right innovation really help in that decision making from Equinor's point of view?
Yeah, we have always developed new technology to have the best solutions, and we definitely need to have new technology to continue to operate in the Arctic as well, and not least going into the energy transition. And that's the reason why we have and are supporting research and going into cooperation with local research institutions. And what we are after is, of course, trying to get as much information as we can in order for us to make sure that we understand the environment that we are working in, and also using this information to develop the technology that we need in order for us to do the operations safely and also with zero harm to the environment. And recent examples that I can give you is that we have gone into corporations where we have now mapping the ecosystem at the polar front. We have been mapping the polar cod and how that behave, and the spawning areas. I think all the information, and also how do we monitor this, and the technology that we use in monitoring this is really important information for us, and also the facts that we can bring out of these information or this research. And I should actually also maybe mention that a lot of these studies, they are presented here in the science section, and so if there is any more interest to it, so there.
So much in the science section at this conference, so thank you. John, let me bring you back in. Obviously, the development of technology can hopefully mean there's a kind of a lighter touch on the environment. But is this kind of technology aspect also quite good for recruitment and retention for your workforces? Does it play into that? Would you say you still have difficulties in terms of recruitment and retention, and what are you doing in that respect?
Yeah, certainly. I think with the innovation that's required, the technology that's being developed, especially across the natural resource development spectrum, there's a lot of opportunity. I think one thing. So I'm also involved in Indigenous outreach and science, STEM, technology, engineering, math, but recruiting people in. And recruiting people, and especially with Indigenous youth, in line with values, so in line with sustainability, in line with reciprocity we heard. And so what does that look like? And so I know in traditional mining and mining and oil and gas, we're seeing much less interest. But it's fascinating because that's probably the greatest places to reduce footprint, emissions intensity through innovation technology. And so we do a little bit of work trying to encourage people to consider all their opportunities, and we're seeing more movement of youth exploring. So they want to make a difference, then make it in those industries and help them transition out through innovation and technology. And they get excited because that aligns with our values. And in supporting advocacy efforts, in some of the energy, like in hydrogen, CCUS, a lot of Indigenous communities are investing in carbon capture, storage, and underground storage. And so they're very excited about that, excited about the new technology. It aligns, and excited to support more conventional energy sources because, again, we can support those now because it does align. We can support those as they transition out. Yeah, innovation research is getting people excited. Because it's new ways we can not just make more money, but it's new ways we can be more efficient, be more profitable, but at the same time assert our values and then get involved and then be sustainable, be stewards. So.
Be stewards. Sigurd, I just want to give you the last word. Have you found that with all of your efforts, the kind of compromises you've made, the getting communities on board, and then the development opportunities that there are in your region, is it persuading more people, younger people, that they have a future?
Yes, I think absolutely, and I think that's one of the things we have to work with. People is one of our biggest problems, and you have to have interesting jobs. You have to have the view of a positive future, and so for me, it's all about showing that Lebesby and Finnmark is the greatest place to live, and it is, although it's quite windy, but the possibilities are enormous. And we have also the tools to make the green shift start in the Arctic. So we have to capitalize on those possibilities and also have good process around it, good involvement, and I think we can see a positive outcome.
Thank you. It's good to hear, and it's really great to hear from you. I'm sorry you couldn't be here. The strong winds obviously put paid to that, but we do really appreciate your input. And many thanks to the rest of the panel. It's been a really great discussion, so thank you.
And I was told as a foreigner that Bodø is the best place to live in northern Norway, but maybe that's a different story. Very strong messages we heard here. Thank you very much for a fantastic panel. So life is complex, the Arctic is complex. It's really about, I like what the Prime Minister said, it's about finding a balance between the larger community and the small community. I think that's a challenge. And I really like what you said, is like, how do we live a good life? And what is it? What's the basic ingredient for a good life? And it's different here and in the south and in Alaska and in Canada and anywhere else. We take a break, half an hour, then we go to all the science sessions that were mentioned on Empowering Arctic cities, talking about adaptive management measures, innovations for sustainable Arctic marine development, a lot of things to learn. And then we'll meet here again after the lunch break at 2 o'clock for another big picture on navigating Arctic realities with Susanna.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Hello, Arctic Frontiers. I'm Gabby Gundry, and I'd like to share my personal definition of Arctic coexistence. To me, Arctic coexistence means having a harmonious relationship between human populations and the physical environment, among the Pan-Arctic Society, and between the Pan-Arctic Society and the global society. I help to ensure coexistence by analyzing threats to the Arctic at the intersection of climate, energy, and U.S. national security. Increasing change, discord, and competition in the Arctic are putting harmonious coexistence at risk. So let's dig in at the 2024 Arctic Frontiers Conference, Action and Reactions.
To me, coexistence is the culmination of collaborative efforts that support our ability to not only survive, but also to thrive. In the Arctic, all stakeholders must invest in coexistence efforts to address the precarity of climate change and how it disproportionately affects Arctic Indigenous peoples. My role in ensuring coexistence in the Arctic weaves together the intersections of my identity as an Indigenous woman, Indigenous knowledge holder, and Arctic security practitioner to inform strategies invested in co-management and co-production of knowledge.
To me, coexistence is about accepting each other the way we are. Where I live in Ålesund, people from about a dozen different nations meet each other every day to work, to live, and eat in the same dining hall. Coexistence is vital for safety and well-being for everyone. My colleagues are also my neighbors, my friends, and my safety net if anything should happen. We are only about 4 permanent residents here, and it's important to everyone that we are all included. That is a part of everyone's job here, no matter their job description.
Yes, it's hard. It's also nice to see you. Glad you made it. Okay. We don't have to do it immediately now. It's a long session, but my bag is an answer.
She's very articulate. And I love the picture. Except I don't like the spinning rod the young boy had. I'm a fly fisherman. So.
I understand, and I am an ice fisherman, so I use a completely different...
I know.
I use the wooden one, so it's totally different. Yeah, okay. Shortest stay in Nigeria.
Oh, really?
And we lived
I know Washburn.
and drove around Minnesota because my brother was a hockey player.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Oh, that's so funny.
Then there's this side of it.
I was in Portland, cooking projects in Alaska a long time ago.
Yeah, it was great. Okay, so this is at 4, so I'll be there in a little bit. Oh yeah, no, right now.
And I thought it was very good when they said the question, you're an oil and gas, so forth. How can you do that?
Let's get
those
out.
working at the Ministry of Affairs, our Arctic ambassador. He's currently in Washington. Yes, I know.
we did. We crossed 10 minutes. I don't think to make the bridge between Washington
We could do that. Is actually cooler. That's actually if you can stand away. Be careful. Be mindful.
Watch the screen.
Yeah.
just to get into we are pressing burn. Yeah. So if you're trying to do some already. Yeah. I'm not going to. Yeah. I was having that conversation.